All right, welcome everyone at the Multi-Networking Community Sync. Today is 26 April. After a week hiatus because of KubeCon, we are back in the game. Let me share the agenda. Sync notes, this guy. So today, I want to kind of deep dive. This is something that last week kind of I assume something about the KCM IPAM controller, and I want to kind of deep dive into that, what it is, what is the whole IPAM story behind it. Then I added Michael, your comment, something that stuck to me last time we talked. You mentioned something about pod networks as a separate CNI config. I want to kind of touch on that, and then after this, let's continue our discussion in the CAP. If there are any other topics, please add them before the continuation of the CAP, because this will just take the rest of the meeting. So make sure that you add it before that. All right. So the first bullet, the KCM IPAM controller, and maybe just so I'm not sure how many folks are aware of that or not, but like to kind of to level set everyone and everyone being on the same page, what the KCM IPAM controller is. Basically, this is a small piece of a code that runs inside the Kube Control Manager. Kube Control Manager, if someone is not aware, this is the kind of one of the core components that comes inside the control plane of Kubernetes. So we have the API server, and then we have the KCM with it. Inside the KCM, there is a bunch of various controllers. If I'm not mistaken, probably all the controllers that you can think of, like that are related to operations of the Kubernetes are there. So one of the pieces is IPAM controller. IPAM controller is basically responsible for populating the node.spec.podCIDR field. Oh, sorry, let me just do it. Dots. So there is a field in the node object, core node object, which holds a per node CIDR. This CIDR is mandatory for a node to be ready. That's what it said. That's the kind of condition for this field. This field, of course, can be set by this IPAM controller, or we can disable it and the user can set it up by themselves. All right, to however they bring up the cluster in their platform. So basically, that's the mechanics behind it. Now, whenever I was talking and referencing IPAM inside pod network in this object that we have discussed, I was always talking about this field being populated and only about this. And the reason behind it is because today the whole IPAM per pod is always done by the CNI. And I doubt any one of us would want to us defining a one way to do the IPAM and decide for everyone else how they have to kind of work around an IPAM. So we cannot define it on this level because it's done by the CNIs themselves. There are so many implementations for it, and they can handle it. So I never had in mind, and I apologize if that was the thought, but I never had in mind that the pod network will take over something like the static IPAM or the host local IPAM that we have available in the CNI package. That's not the case because this is a job for the CNI. What this field basically is I would say a helper, because it's not mandatory to use it. It's mandatory to set it for the node to be ready, but it's not mandatory to use it. And that's what I talked with some folks about this and with team on the history of this, and that was initially introduced to kind of help with the CIDRs that needs to be used, but from my understanding it's not the best thing, and the reason behind it is because it's not enforced. So it can be said, but the platform doesn't really have to use it. So that's what the story behind this is. And this is what basically in our level of approach for the pod network object, this is the only thing that we can control, because that's the only thing that is exposed today in terms of like IPAM for pods. And we don't want to get into the story of taking over how the CNIs do their IPAM, because that's too much, and I wouldn't want to go there. Is that clear? Are there any questions to this, what I just said? Or are we all on the same page and that now that's kind of understandable?
So I have the question about the API side, but before that, my company may left at the maybe the 15 minutes later. So there may be, how about to proceed the my company's pod network as separated CNI conf topic first?
Yeah. Okay. Let's do that. So now, Michael, and correct me if I'm wrong. Last time we talked, you mentioned something like this, like the pod network should point to a separate CNI config or something along the lines. If I misspelled it, then I apologize. Is that what you had in mind?
Well, yeah, what works today is what's in Etsy Network D, Etsy CNI Network D, or whatever the CNI environment variable points to for configs. Today, the very first or the only config found is what's used.
Right, exactly, and that's true. And
with things like Podman or Docker, even though it doesn't use CNI, the point I can make is you just name which one of those files instead of taking the first one that's, I think the term's used ASCII-betically. Instead of finding the only one or the first one the file system returns, just name it and then we're done in a backward compatible manner. Excuse me.
That's all correct, Michael. What I want to point out is this is one of the ways of implementing this. This is not the only one to do this. So when you describe all this, it's all valid, but it's not the only use case that we want to handle. That's what I want to point out. And what you're saying is perfectly valid one way of implementing this. I fully agree, but I want to point out it's not the only way. And there is various folks here that wants to do it completely differently, don't want to kind of deal with the CNI in full, what you would think, where I would have separate CNI or some networks in my CRI that then I just point to through the pod network. That's valid approach, but that's not the only approach. That's what I'm trying to say here.
But I think it's a scope creep. It's in addition to what we were originally talking about.
I don't think that's the thing, because scope creep, it's not, because that's left, how you implement this, it's always left to the implementer. And that's what we always talk through all the docs on how we implement this and how we deal with this. What you're saying is you always have to have CNI per pod network and you have to do it this way. And I say no, because I don't want to do it through the CNI. I will have one controller, a daemon set per node that will look at this object and do stuff for me, because that's how I'm doing. The CNI is just a stub for me. It's just a stub for the kubelet to call and send a signal to my controller. I saw something that Multus is doing today is something they call tick CNI. That's that's what I have in mind, right? You don't have to deal with the CNI config at all. It's just a signal to your controller to then take over and do all the machination it has to do without any awareness of the files on the file. The basic concept of what you just said about the ordering of the files and the path, that still is the same. Nobody's changing that. But what I'm saying is you have the various options, and I'm not saying that the CNI in the future, and we have Michael here, Michael Zappa, that's CNI eventually can fully support this and can be a valid approach to do what you're saying. Let's change that. But I'm considering changes to the CNI as a orthogonal thing and an add-on. Then in the future, when we have this, then CNI can adjust to be what you just said or something else. And of course, it will have to be backward compatible, because that's what we need. That's what we are trying to build towards. But I say we don't have to define how the implementation has to be done. And unless there might be some places we have to talk like RBAC, where we have to how we enforce things. Then we will have to discuss on how kind of that's going to work. I agree on that part, that this might be a bit tricky around that one. But I'm keep kind of underlying the fact that the way you're thinking, it's one of the ways to implement this. And this is left, by the way, to the implementers, not to us to decide that. Because there is so many, there's like, I'm not sure.
Not if I have to add a whole bunch of crap to the API.
That's where we are. That's why we are here, to identify what is the most common elements that we can add to the API, so that everyone is happy, right? That's why we are here.
Everyone,
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
including
Yes.
my data center people who rather just tell you get on this network.
So okay, so maybe I agree with you. 80 or 90% of the use cases. What about that? Because that's I agree with you. Everyone, it might be.
I have a way. My suggestion is 100% of the use cases.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that's why in my doc, I think you even commented on that, or someone was commented. Most of the use cases, right? I did use that word over there. Someone in my current doc as well. So yeah. Michael, you had a hand.
Yeah, Mike, you might have missed the discussion around parameters ref that might be insightful for you. I can send you the link to that recording, just so you can give it a look through.
Yeah. Michael Cambria, did I kind of explain some and kind of clarify some of the things?
Yeah, no, I was for personal reasons, I was away for a bit, and I'm sure I'm still catching up on stuff. Thanks.
That's fine. No problem. Okay. Okay. Jamie, network versus attachment. Could you elaborate? What is the question here? We cannot hear you if you're speaking. Yeah. So before we go there, there was a question. So what's core Kubernetes do for each case? Yeah, I will dive into that. Give me a sec. I'm gonna start sharing the cap, and we're gonna go back to that, and I will explain that to that answer to that question. Jamie, did you get your mic resolved? So maybe just
hi me. Hi me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I'm just the told Jaime about.
Where's it, Tomo?
So there, yeah. The Jaime is called Jaime. So.
Oh, Jaime, I apologize. Yeah, my mistake. I apologize. So just maybe to what till you fix and you have ask more questions to kind of what is the difference between network versus attachment? Is this about so maybe I will because that's are we talking about pod network object versus the Multius's NADS network attachment definition, or if that's the word, if that's the ask, basically NADS are Multius's way to specify multi-networking, and pod network can reference network attachments, right? But from perspective of because we want to call the kind of operation of connecting to a network an attachment as well. There is that aspect. I'm not sure whether you have that something in mind around that one or the objects. So there was a chat.
But Hemi says he's having audio problems.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
we should-
I see.
So maybe we should just have the same question next week. There
Yeah,
was
let's do that.
one piece of context is there was a bunch of discussion about terminology of network and attachment when Multus was devised, and I suspect it's related to that. But let's let Hemi speak for himself next week.
Okay.
Assuming that's
Jaime, I will add I will add you to the next next topic to the next meeting. All right, let me just switch to this guy. Share this tab. Okay, so now getting back to our, let me just zoom this in a bit. Can you see it okay?
Can you guys hear me
Yes.
now?
Oh, now, yeah, we can hear you, Jaime.
Oh, is it a good time to ask the question or?
Yeah,
I
go
can
ahead.
take
Yeah,
it
yeah,
quick?
definitely.
Yeah, so what I wanted to ask here is, it might have been discussed before, but I went through the requirements cap and the pod network draft. And the thing that has been happening, this is referring to Multus, as you have mentioned before. So the thing that has been happening with Multus and the network and plumbing group specification is that sometimes, so you have attributes that apply to the network, and then you have attributes that apply on how you attach to that network.
Mhm.
And having a single entity to try to describe both things leads to a situation where you have multiple pod networks, if we call it here by that name, or multiple network attachment definitions, if we call it by the network plumbing specification. You end up duplicating all the network information just to change an attribute of what, just to change something about how you attach to that network. So because you only have one thing that is describing the full thing, it's describing both how the network is and how you attach to it.
Right.
I don't know if I'm happy to get a short answer if this was discussed and I missed it.
No, it wasn't. So, Jaime, what we are going to talk about is, right now we're talking default network, but eventually I'm just attaching pod network to pod. I think this is your topic, and basically, what can we specify there, right? So I have some proposals here. Look at those, but we have to create something that is, I think this is what you're getting. What sort of parameters can I specify in my pod versus what can I specify in my network? And let's discuss that when we get there. We haven't yet. So I think I know what you say. Yes. And
Okay,
basically,
okay.
yeah, and basically what you're saying, and I am aware of the kind of rich approach for Multus, what it can do today through the annotations. But keep in mind, this is Multus, and that won't apply everywhere. But still, it won't mean that you won't be able to use the Multus annotations to do some of the additional configuration. That can still be there if we won't take it into the core approach. Okay,
Okay,
but
so
let's discuss this after when we get there. Okay.
Okay. There's a second side to my question, though.
Okay.
I've seen that there's going to be, or I saw in the cap that there's some kind of downward API being proposed to set on the pods environment, some details about the network or whatever. But I haven't seen anything referencing if any of this information is going to, or how it's going to transpire into the CNI invocation itself. And I ask this because with Multus as well, so I am always referring to Multus because that's what we have used about it this time. We have had difficulties when the CI is invoked. We have had these difficulties identifying to which attachment of the multiples attachment a pod can have is that invocation being referred to. One way of correlating is the interface name. So if you specify the interface name in the pod, then of course you get the same interface name in the CNI invocation, and you know which attachment you're talking about. But the interface name is here being defined optional as optional, the same as in Multus, which is optional. So basically, some difficulties that we have been having in the past is actually in the CNI invocation being able to identify which of the attachment is that invocation being referred to in an easy way. I mean,
right. So Jaime, it's the same same answer. We didn't talk about this yet. So when we get there, and as you said, as you read through the requirements, this is one of the requirements to have that. And I think it's in phase 1, if I'm not mistaken. So we're definitely gonna cover this in this time frame for this cap.
Okay. Okay,
All right.
that's okay. Sorry for the time wasted.
No. That's fine. Thanks for asking the question. Before we dig this into I forgot about one more thing. Next week, in 2 weeks, I am going for a 2 weeks vacation. So I needed a volunteer to lead this meeting. So I will throw that in. Please reach out to me if you want to do that. If there will not be anyone that would like to drive this meeting, unless you want to just to me, then you can definitely can. But I will need someone to drive this meeting for 2 weeks that I'm going to take vacation for. So reach out to me if you want to do that in my place and continue the discussion. Otherwise, we can always cancel the meetings and then meet after I'm back. So yep, just throwing that in. Please let me know so that we can kind of warn everyone accordingly. All right. Let's going back to the IPAM story. So there was a question: how then those flags control the whole thing. So there is a bit more functionality that I'm trying to kind of push here to what we have available in KCM with this IPAM controller. In KCM IPAM controller, what it says is I can enable this, and then I have PodCider that will be defined in the node, and that's it. What I want to be more restrictive here is to say, if I have any of those set to Kubernetes and external, I then expect that IP to be present. All right. So that's the one.
So does this means the this this cap is enhancing the which
yes, a
the
bit,
node
yes.
spec PodCider field for each network. So
Exactly,
currently the node spec PodCider is having the only one field, one string. But so based on your comment, there was once the IPAM type how do I say the node spec PodCider could be erased or some of the stuff, and then for each network which specifying the IPAM type equal Kubernetes, then the KCM will provide the PodCider for each network.
that's the ultimate goal, yes, to have. And I want to talk about this in this cap. I don't have it spelled out. It is slightly spelled out in the initial draft if you look at that one, because I'm copying things from there to here, some of the ideas, and then I'm discussing and we adjusting. But basically what you just said, and I want to use KC, the IPAM controller, and expand the node object to now not only specify the PodCider for the default network, but as well for all the other networks, including. And then whether you use it, this will still be the same approach. If whether your network is going to use that cider from the node is optional, because I don't want to kind of change that part from someone who's doing it.
So how about adding these? I mean that so currently this field, I mean that the IPAM 4, IPAM 6, and then also the Kubernetes external non-variable is for these stuff, I suppose. So I mean that so currently as you mentioned, this field IPAM 6 and IPAM 4 is used to Kubernetes the KCM to KCM IPAM controller to provides the some certain cider from the cluster cider, right?
Yes.
So this is only the purpose. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the only purpose of this. Yes,
so,
because
and then this purpose is not in this cap. Is that correct? I mean that in this cap you do not enhancing the node spec PodCider.
I will. I do want to do that.
In this cap?
Yes.
Okay.
I do want to do that because PodCider is the core piece that we can control from the core side. And I want to modify that, right? To adjust for this, right? To have KCM and modify KCM IPAM to understand multi-networking, and having cluster cider to have a field or something in it to specify, oh, I'm creating now this object for this network, not for the default, right?
Okay, so currently this cap doesn't mentions the
Doesn't, yeah, but
changes
we
in the node side. So
step by step. I'm doing it phases, but that's my goal. Yes, that would be my ultimate goal. And what I want to kind of though point out is you specifying the internal IPAM will just enable the KCM to populate those fields in the nodes. It doesn't mean you have your CNI, your stuff that you do for multi-networking has to use it. It can it can, because you're going to have a fields with per node IPAMs if you want to use it, but you don't have to. It's still optional, so that part will be there. But what it does mean though is that if you specify the Kubernetes in one of the v4 or v6, means you have to provide that IP on that pod. Otherwise, what I would like to say is otherwise the kubelet will deem your pod unready if you don't provide those IPs when you return. That's what that's the additional functionality that I would like to kind of add to this, that the downward API would expect from you an IPs for families that you specified here. This is the new thing that this is how I would like to expand this whole the kind of the IPAM story behind it, because then I can say, okay, my network has to have v4 and only that, right? Because my 6 was set as none, so v4 is set to Kubernetes, all external. That means kubelet will expect, give me the v4 for this interface in your pod, because this network has that value set. And then if you don't specify, don't provide it to me back, I will deem your pod not ready. That's the new functionality that I would like to expand on this. It will and basically defines what. Yeah, go on.
So that this is just the comments. So currently this, how do I say, your mentions the feature is not described in this cap. So I'm a little bit confusing that why we need it. So maybe the how do I say, this field should be revisited when you describing this fit the functionality. I mean that they're changing the node pot side node spec pot sider, changing these API to support the multi-network, and then you need to also changing the cluster sider field as well. So
no, let's talk about it now then. What do you mean?
I mean that they're not talking. I mean that. So currently you do not describing in this cap.
Oh, what does it?
About the changes of the node spec pod sider or some sort of stuff. So that
we will get there. I will add that section, but right now I didn't want to.
I understood that you are going to add, but also currently so I mean that today I'm looking at this stuff. I mean before this meeting, but at that time I cannot find that.
I see what you say.
So maybe
because
maybe the other attendees is also the same understanding, I think. So there maybe first we need to look into the entire features, and then we should discuss about that. So currently we only
Tomo, give me a second here. Me talking about whether this is how this is going to be implemented doesn't change the fact, do we really need these fields? That's what I'm coming from. I'm introducing those fields and defining how they're gonna function, and me describing how the Kubernetes way is going to work. This is just one of the 3 options that it has. So we don't have to know the details to decide, just for this one, to decide whether we need this field at all, and whether do we need the v4 and v6. That's why this is where I'm coming from, and that's why I decided to let's push it further on, because it's not important. Yes, right now maybe some of the backgrounds what it will do is needed, but the details, because I kind of assumed, and I apologize for that, I assumed that everyone's aware of the KCM and the IPAM controller in it, but I think right now we are on the same page on that. And how those details work is not important to decide whether we need those 2 fields. Are we agree on that?
Yes, I think, I mean, you're saying so it's an abstraction and we don't have to look at the exact implementation of that abstraction right now.
Exactly. And let's right now what's the high level of these parameters? Are we agreeing on that part? And I will add it to the text that if I specify other thing, then if I specify external or Kubernetes on one of the fields, Kubelet requires you to provide those IPs on a downward API, or however we're gonna identify how we're gonna return back the IPs, but they have to be provided. Otherwise, I will throw you an error, or not throw you an error. Otherwise I will just not make you ready, because this interface for this pod requires, let's say, 2 networks, and you provided just one. Sorry, I will deem you not ready. Is that concept fine with everyone? I'm not sure whether that's possible to achieve in terms of implementation. That's I'm putting that as a secondary. But if we have this kind of high level goal, is that something that's agreeable with everyone?
Ashik, 2 interfaces mean I4 and IV6 separate, or 2 interfaces, 2 pod network, 2 V4 pod network separate?
No, that means a single, whatever in your case it is, right? We talked about, because pod network usually means a separate Linux interface, right?
Right.
So let's say a VIET pair, right? So basically you have a one end in the pod. This is what this is the most common use case, L2 use case, where you have each pod network is a separate interface inside the pod. And for that one, you expect either one V4 or one V6, or if you specify both, I expect both for that single instance of the interface for the pod. And basically, because keep in mind how it is represented inside the pod, it's up to your implementation. It can be just a CIDRs. And what we talked, I think last time we mentioned that someone was thinking, can this be a completely L3? I don't care about additional interfaces like Linux interfaces inside the pod. I just want to have access to those CIDRs inside the pod. And if you want to represent the pod network as such, we just need to expect that for whatever you connect, because, and this is where we're gonna get to probably next step is after the default network, pod network, we will talk about the attachment. So basically, let's use that word. Per each attachment, you expect that specific IPs. That's what it is. So maybe that's the perfect word for this, the attachment for the pod, right? So per each attachment that you define inside the pod, we require either, this will specify what is required, right, by these comments. Did I make it clear?
Yeah.
Now?
Yeah, you
Okay.
did. The one thing which was missing, I think you covered that as part of the attachment, is what interface this pod network will be attached to. I think that's what you covered as part of the attachment. Because I don't see any of the required field that this pod network will be attached to what interface.
So that's something that
all
is
MAC address. If there are 2 NICs coming on the VM, I want to attach it to this ith of that VM.
Yeah, so basically that is up to your implementation on how you then link it, how you link your attachment to the your host namespace in your node. It is up to your implementation. This is something that we do not specify and will not specify, because in Multus, and I will just keep and drive on Multus here all the time. If you, for example, specify a network attachment definition that uses MAC VLAN, in MAC VLAN's definition, you have to specify I think it's called master flag, master or parent, I'm not sure, but there is a config called master, which identifies which interface on the node I have to use. And that's how it's done in that implementation. Your implementation might pick it up based on completely different things, or some implementation might don't even care about which host interface, because they're using vSwitch and it's all virtual and it's all inside that vSwitch. So because of that purpose, this spec will never specify that part. It's up to the implementation. Okay, thank you.
So the thing that I'm finding a little tricky about this, I get the idea and I'm quite happy with it. I think the bit that I to me, IPAM has connotations of this is about how the addresses are actually managed, about the interface you're using and how that is done, as opposed to how those addresses are being reported back. And so I can't think of a better terminology. So maybe this isn't a helpful comment, but I find the terminology a little confusing. So
I agree with you on that one. And maybe there should be, the name should be slightly different. Not IPAM, but IP type, IP something, or a PodCider or PodCider maybe. I agree with you. Maybe
and maybe just having a couple of sentences in the comment
I will.
above
Yeah, I will.
that
I will
clarifies this actually would just make it much easier because
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. IPAM confuses, the word of IPAM confuses a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm open for throw me some ideas then.
it's almost like a
I'm not alone
returns
here, folks. I'm not alone here. We're all here.
it's almost like a returns address field or something like that, but that's a terrible name. So that's the right concept, but that name's even worse. So
and I agree, the name is unfortunate, and I agree it should not be called IPAM. I agree on that one. Please think about a name and let me know. Comment on the doc if you have something better.
I mean, I don't want to disagree completely. It is kind of an IPAM because internally you are calling that specific IPAM to set up the network for this, which is either external or Kubernetes. So, yeah, but it is, yeah, it is confusing.
Yeah, so, but still, just having this discussion that we had till now kind of makes it kind of, everyone was thinking that IPAM, okay, we are going to do per pod IPAM, which is not ideal. So it should not be that. And here I had a time to explain all of you on what it means. When someone's gonna read through this cap, that might not be the case, and they're gonna ask the same questions over there. So let's maybe think about some better name for this to. I will think about internally as well. I ask my team, maybe someone there will have some idea as well. But I think on the requirements for this, any other questions and what this mean? If not, then we come back to my idea. This is where we from 2 weeks ago, where we talked. So since IPAM, the internal one, is based off of KCM, the control for the IPAM control inside KCM is done through those two fields. There are arguments for this KCM. So allocate node siders, and this is an argument to the kube control manager. And there is another field called cluster sider. All right. And keep in mind, this is in the context of default network. So this is for the default network. So what happens if I update my cluster from 127 to 130 or something where this guy is in, and we require a default network to be present? How we now create that default network? Because that's what it boils down to. We have to have it, right? If we are making this thing as a core component, we need to make sure that how we are migrating from one to the other. And the way to do this is through those fields, since we are controlling KCM on there. And as you can see here, this is all description on how we do this. Because we need to set, when I want to automate or maybe I want to give an ability to automate the creation of the default network, pod network, which is required because if we want to depend everything on the default for all the other pods, we have to have it, right? So what I want to do is give an automated way to do this, but of course give a way to manually create it as well. And this can be done then through, if I upgrade my cluster, if someone will want to finally support this, during upgrade of my cluster, I can set this flag to say that, no, I will create the default network for the cluster that now requires this object to be there, right? So then I can use this flag to kind of set it up myself. So the first automated way, what I'm thinking is, since the only fields we have to set in this object is basically those two fields, the IPAM4 and v6, all the other fields are optional and they don't have to be specified. and we don't have any knowledge about the other one. So basically, that's not something that we would really care at this point. But we do care about those things, the IPAM 4 and 6 fields. What we can deduct those values based on what are the arguments provided to KCM. Basically, first thing is this allocate defines whether we even run the IPAM controller. So basically, that can gives us a notification on okay, all the, where was this? What I'm saying, all the stuff is not defined. So basically, what I'm going to want to do is if the allocate node CIDR is false, we don't really know how this whole thing is done, because maybe someone is using the pod CIDRs, but the whole thing is done by some external things. And here I have in mind cloud, GKE as well. We don't use the node CIDR in GKE. There is a flag called cloud provider or something like that, which then sees the whole, even modification of the addition of the pod CIDR to some external different controller, not the KCM one. So basically, this flag is disabled, and in this case, I would like to just not specify this field. And the reason for that is because I don't really know which IPAMs are you going to use. Is it V4, is it V6, or are you dual stack? Because it's you don't specify that at all, so I cannot kind of infer what you really have to set. And since I want to enforce what IPs you have to return by this is very important of which IPAMs 4 or 6 I do set. So that's why I leave those fields empty. And this is what I was referring, and to remind you all, even if the object is immutable, I would want to use the same mechanism that the pod CIDR has on the node. And to remind you, the pod CIDR on the node, initially when the node is created, the pod CIDR field is empty, is not set. And what it has a special functionality is that you cannot mutate a value to a different value, but you can mutate from empty to value. That's what it has. The pod CIDR has that kind of capability that from empty you can set any value, but after it's set you cannot change it. I want to do the same here with this with the default object, where if you don't set it, it's fine, but then you can set one of the values that you wish to do, right? So you can set it once, but then you cannot change it, to keep in mind of what can be done. So basically, that's how I would kind of deal with the migration in case where nobody's using the IPAM controller. In other cases, as I said, the arguments here are all the options basically that's possible. So basically, if I had the allocator CIDR set to true, means the IPAM controller is taking part in the whole thing. Then user has to specify cluster CIDRs, and basically this cluster CIDR has ability to specify either single IP, single family, or dual stack with a comma separated list. And you can look at, I think this is a link to this argument, so you can read more on this. But basically, you have to take my word for it. This is a way to specify both IPs to this argument. And when we do this, then I will just say, okay, you want to do dual stack. So both are set to Kubernetes because you have true, you have specified both. I will set this to like this. Otherwise, if you specify only single family, I will change the other value to none, meaning I don't expect any value and I don't want to change it in the future, right? So basically, I will set it to only the one family being set and the other one being set to none. Any questions to this? Does this make sense? This is for the automatic creation.
Just a clarification, if you set it to none during the automation, can you later set it to
No.
Kubernetes?
No, that's the thing, right? Because that means that it's already set. So in case where it's not set, then because this is a value, that's the point of it. I want to explicitly say a value to state I don't want to use V6, right? I'm not sure you can change. Can you change existing cluster to dual stack? Probably you could, or you cannot. So that's a tricky piece, right? I'm not sure whether that should be allowed, right? Changing from none or not setting this. Maybe that should be the case then, right? We could, when it's singles family, we do not set it, so that in the future, if you want to change to dual stack, then you can just add that yourself.
Yeah, that's my concern. If that you will never be able to enable it.
To dual stack.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last thing is manual creation, which will basically disable the whole this all algorithm on how to create the default network, and it would there will be a separate flag into KCM because I'm seeing this default network being created by the KCM itself, and based on those arguments. But then you can specify this disable default pod network creation, because as the cluster comes up, being upgraded, what's not, I am going to myself introduce that object. And this is important because I would like to make kubelets readiness and then nodes readiness based on existence of this default pod network, right? So if you, will be explicit flag you would have to specify, but that will mean that you apply this object to the cluster on your own through your automation, your installer of the Kubernetes cluster, right? So I want to give that kind of capability to. I don't want to do any of your automation. I will create default because, for example, I want to have a. I fully implement this whole thing. I want to define as well parameters ref. I want to, so my default network has to point to a parameters ref, which then just my CNI uniformly uses for additional networks and for the default as well. So then I don't have to, do something else for the default network versus the normal network. I do have it. I can implement it so uniformly so that every network is treated in par with everything. All right. So that's kind of the idea behind as well manual creation. Any questions to this? I think this hopefully makes sense. That's why.
That makes sense. I think one more question that I had is roll back. Let's say something went wrong and you go back. That would be problematic, I guess, right? With this.
I think if you roll back, your your KCM, the controller that blocks this object, or maybe even an awareness of this object will go back, right? Will get deleted. I'm not sure how does that work exactly with KCM. In CRDs, you have this ARD definition, and then you can delete that, and all the object goes away. But if you roll back, you will roll back as well the guards on deletion of this object, because the KCM will have all the information about can I delete this object, or maybe it will be an API. I'm not sure exactly where, but basically let's call it a webhook that will guard this network default network object to be deleted will be gone, so I can easily delete it. So, and basically I'm not saying that we are disabling those fields. We are not. They are still there. So basically roll front or back, it should work. I don't see this as being an issue, right? It's only up to your implementation to properly support, both ways, and it has to, right? When you roll in front or back, right? I'm not sure who was first. Neha.
Thanks, Moshe. I find making these as immutable fields once set, I find it hard to, especially in case of update scenarios. Let's say my cluster is created with one CNI. Now I have implemented a version of like a better version, different CNI, which will handle the default network, and I'm doing the upgrade from the previous one to the external one. Now because this property is set on a default on a cluster, my upgrade story is broken. I can't move my app CNIs.
Yeah, I was about to go there, and I will because I talked with the SIG network. and we have to support this guy. That's one of the requirements, is that we do have to support a ways what you just described, Neha. How do we upgrade, change the CNI completely? We have to support that case. And yeah, let's talk about
Because
that,
we do that
in a second.
we do it like as CNI is evolving in Microsoft as well. We are moving from the older ones, which has limitations, to the new one, which is more advanced and scalable.
Right. So yeah, and I heard that that's a feedback I got from the SIG networking as well, where we have to support such use case, what you're describing, that I can change from one CNI to the other for the default network, because for the additional networks, as soon as the network is not used by any of the pods, I should be able to just delete it, right? That's something that definitely, and then I create a new one. But for the default, since it cannot be removed at all, we have to do something about it. Tomo?
Yep. So in the section of the manual creation at the end of this paragraph, you mentions that if the default network is not created, at that time the kubelet will send in their CNI not ready. But at that time, maybe we should clearly mention that default network is not created. I mean that. So this issue is happened because the default network is missing. So this is not the CNI not ready. Or maybe the default network not ready, I think.
Yeah, that's an implementation detail. I agree with you. That's probably, this is just, I know there is a network readiness. We probably have to tweak into the current yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so then maybe the error message should explicitly mention what is happened. So especially if someone understanding this, the default, the network object is related to CNI.
Yeah, definitely.
This is not. So this should be.
This will be not only for manual, it will be reported even for the automated until the automated kicks in, right? So keep that in mind, that it will be just common, right? Kubelet will expect the pods, the default pod network to be there. If it's not, then it will just report. I would probably have to put this, by the way, into a separate section, because do I have this somewhere here, or maybe even copy it over here? So yeah, I will make sure that I think it should be here. Any other comments to this? All right, so to what Neha kind of mentioned is exactly this use case, right? What I was thinking is to introduce something called an admin mode to the cluster that will allow a deletion of the default pod network, and then recreation of it, right? So basically, because that's how for the other networks, that's what we would do. But now what we would do for default network, and I don't have a idea here. If anyone can think of something, I welcome any proposals.
Yeah,
What I'm
change it completely in the admin mode. So like the way we do upgrades internally is you have certain node pools which are running on the older network, and then you are live migrating the cluster to the new CNI, new IPAM. So you add a node pool, and then you move that node pool to the new CNI, and then you slowly migrate the old ones to the new ones. That's how. That's one way of doing. One is like destructive migration, where you stop the cluster, migrate, and then one is live migration. So I want us to support both.
So the blue-green, I would assume that's straightforward. There's nothing to it, right? Blue-green, the destruction that you're saying, I would call it a blue-green type of deployment. And basically, this is straightforward. You just recreate a cluster, right? That's easy. The problem is with the migration that you, the kind of the
live migration, I would call it.
The live migration, it's a problem, because if my implementation fully supports if my migration fully supports the pod network as is, right? Fully, I read through it, I read the parameters of it and what's not. And then suddenly I want to change from one to the other. How do I now go from one version to the other version. How do we do that, right?
Those
Because
are the
now,
implementation detail.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's the implementation detail of the new IPAM to also have some back compat policies with the old one, so that you
Not exactly. Let's assume, Neha, let's assume I have a completely I'm switching from let's call like switching from Calico to Cilium. Let's do that. I'm doing I'm going a completely breakthrough approach. I'm switching from Calico to Cilium. How do I do that? Because why I'm asking that is because I will have, let's assume from both I have a parameters reference for both, and they are completely different. Calico has their own Calico something parameters, and Cilium has their own Cilium parameters. But then the default, which both implementation read through pod network, and the default one currently points to the Calico, the old one, right? How do I now make sure the new node pool, when I bring it up, uses the Cilium parameters, which I want to define? So that's my problem, right? Because both will have to have a default network defined, and I cannot change the name for it.
Correct. Exactly the problem I'm trying to say that we need to solve. And we have internally in Microsoft different flavors of CNI. Let's say we have KubeNet. Now we are trying to migrate those KubeNet clusters to overlay, or Azure CNI V1 clusters to overlay.
Exactly.
Even though they are internal CNI between Kubernetes, so we have the control of both. But there is a migration story there. Like in this case, overlay is aware of the KubeNet nodes so that it does not assign the overlapping CIDR to
Exactly.
the
And basically I even proposed I even kind of visualize a different problem, right? How do I deal with different parameters, right, between the two, and how do I now migrate?
Then
right?
are we saying then the default pod network is per node pool, not a cluster wide? Because
node.
then then I can specify for this node pool, use this Kubernetes as the running one, and when I'm migrating, my new default network will be for the interim. For this node pool, I will have this pod network.
Right. The thing here is Kubernetes doesn't have a concept of node pool. So yes, GKE has it. Most of our platforms in Google have node pool concept. You have it, but Kubernetes by default has a concept of just a node, not a node pool. If I'm not mistaken, someone can prove me.
Yes, correct. But
so if we were to do something per, it will have to be per node, not a node pool, because node pool concept doesn't exist.
That's where I was going. Eventually, it will get sprinkled across per node.
Right. So I think we are at the time. Let's next week discuss about how to deal with this admin mode. There's some of the ideas maybe we can introduce, but it's still we have to resolve on how we deal with two different configurations. Do we have like in admin mode, I can create a default v2 name or something like that, like a special name, which basically will be used by the other implementation temporarily. And then I delete the default and then I rename the default v2 to default. Maybe that, because we need a bucket as well to kind of hold both at the same time, right? So default for the old stuff and default v something that will be created, and then if we have that, then we can migrate between the two, something like that. Maybe that's an idea. Think about this. Let's call it a quiz for today, and I'm looking forward to someone. Please, if you someone reach out, you could drive the discussion for the mid-May meetings. Please reach out to me if you want to drive that. Then I can give you some notes on what we can, what are the next steps to talk about, and of course you can have your own ideas on how to drive this. That's it's not. I'm just can give you some suggestions. All right, folks. Have a nice week and meet you next week. Bye.